My name is Tatiana Louis-Jacques, and the focus of my final project will be Irish folk music, specifically fiddling. My interest in this genre stems from back in high school, the first time I listened to the Grad radio sessions, which is an Appalachian folk album recorded by Stuart Duncan, Edgar Meyer, Yo-Yo Ma, and Chris Thiele. Now, Chris Thiele has become one of my absolute favorite musicians, and if I had the time and resources, I probably would have chosen the mandolin for this project. But the violin was much more reasonable, both in terms of access to an instrument. I got mine from my school, and also actually being able to learn it. You know, the mandolin has, I think, 8 total strings. Like, there's 2 strings per string. It's complicated. Violin, 4 strings. I think I can do that. In terms of picking Irish fiddling, that came out of discussions with my friend Nate, who you'll see later in the video, and my friend Bridget, who has done research into Celtic music. My plan for learning how to fiddle involves mainly 2 things. I'm gonna have a lesson with Nathan, and I'm gonna practice a whole bunch. The lesson's gonna be at Nathan's house. We discussed ahead of time what kind of tune, but he's gonna finalize which tune when I get there, and I'm gonna learn it completely by rote. From there, I'm gonna go home, do my best to practice and sound decent. I'll listen to sessions, on YouTube and watch YouTube videos to get a feel for style, but really everything I'm gonna end up performing is going to be based on what I do in my lesson with Nate. My sources for this project, like I said before, Nathan. Secondly, I'm going to be watching some fiddling tutorial videos from the Online Academy of Irish Music. They have a number of series and playlists about beginning fiddling, which seem really informative. And then for information more about history, I'm going to be looking at Across the Water, Teaching Irish Music and Dance at Home and Abroad by Rebecca E. Farrell. I was fortunate that this was a book I have access to through the TC library, and it has a lot of good information. The tune I ended up learning is called Breeches Full of Stitches. Due to regional differences throughout Ireland, it could have been Breeches Full of Stitches, the Irish Lads, A Jolly Boy, Witches, Breeches, bunch of different names depending on where you are. Also, it might not sound exactly the same depending on where you learned it and who you learned it from. Region was a big part of the music tradition. This particular website has 8 different versions of Breeches Full of Stitches. My lesson with Nate mirrors how people would have learned tunes back in the day, completely by rote. He's gonna play a phrase, I repeat the phrase, until I get it right. He plays the next phrase, so forth and so forth. We put it together until you know the whole tune. The difference between me and a traditional historical fiddler is that Nathan had to explicitly explain things like ornaments, phrasing, nonverbal communication, and things like that someone who grew up in the tradition would have just learned through being in their community. After my lesson, I really just focused on practicing various phrases, developing muscle memory, and just trying to improve some of my just basic violin technique in order to get the best sound that I could out of the instrument. So some history. Celts have been documented living in Ireland as far back as 2000 BCE. When Christianity was introduced to the island, monasteries became the center of music tradition, but as more and more groups came together, music simply became an essential part of daily life. One of the earliest known compilations of traditional Irish music was published in Dublin in 1726. It's called A Collection of the Most Celebrated Irish Tunes Proper for Violin, German Flute, and Hautboy. Hautboy? 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 Whoa. 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 Oh, hautboy? Not important. What is important is that we can see the violin going back centuries has been a staple instrument in the Irish music tradition. Prior to the 1930s, music would be played by common folks in their homes, right? There would be house dances, which were actually used often as fundraising events for people in the community who may have been down on their luck. Now, this all ended in 1935. Catholic conservative lawmakers enacted the Dance Hall Act, which essentially said that all music making had to be done with a license and in strictly supervised locations. Think like that town in Footloose, right? When the religious pastor doesn't like dancing in the town, and then Kevin Bacon like goes to a party and brings dancing back. Yeah, I think that might be the inspiration for Footloose. In 1952, the
Cultus Cultori Erin
was established with the goal of promoting traditional Irish music, dance, and the Irish language. The CCE still exists today, and they've established multi-tiered, all-age national competitions for every major instrument in, the Irish tradition. The highest award, the All-Ireland title, is extremely sought after and has been a huge driving force in the sponsorship of Irish music for the past 60 plus years. Now, when it comes to learning how to fiddle, there's kind of two ways this kind of happens now. So the one way is like through school. Starting in 1999, the national music curriculum was revised to include traditional Irish music at primary school level so that younger students would be introduced to this style. The only issue was that not all the teachers could speak Gaelic, and pronunciation and the intricacies of the language were often lost. Fortunately, there are some traditional musicians who do teach in schools who will still teach their students and ensembles completely by rote. Once they learn the full tune, then ornaments will be added to establish, regional flair. Fiddlers also learn from their parents and members of their community. That kind of learning often starts much younger, as young as 4 or 5, and continues up until adulthood. So far, I've talked about Irish, fiddle music as kind of one entity, but really there's a number of types of tunes present in Ireland. Reels are faster tunes that are like in 4/4 time. Hornpipes are like slower reels. Polkas have a really steady tempo, and they're usually, in like 2/4 time, and they're simpler overall. Jigs are dance music that are often written in compound meter, 6/8 time. Slip jigs are jigs, but in 9/8 time. Slip jigs involve much more graceful dancing than you might imagine in a traditional jig. Slides are jigs, but in 12/8 time. They have longer phrases that would not fit in a 6/8 bar. That's how you can tell the difference. Slow airs are tunes that replicate or emulate Gaelic singing. They pay much more attention to tone and intonation than the other types of tunes do. And like the name implies, they're usually slower. As you'll see in my lesson video, Breeches is a polka. In terms of regional difference, just like people have different dialects when speaking, there's different styles of playing depending on where in Ireland you grew up. In the northwest corner of Ireland, there was the Donegal style. It's fast, it's aggressive, and there's an emphasis on really powerful bow strokes and frequent bowed triplets. Sligo is a style kind of named for a famous fiddler, Michael Coleman, who came to the United States from the town of Sligo in Ireland. It's light, it's bouncy, it's rich in ornaments, has the bowed triplets of the Donegal style, and the rolling and slurring that would be found further south. The Clare style is really distinguished by the slow tempos, the subtle ornamentations, and the use of long, fluid bowing. Cork and Kerry have a strong polka tradition. Simple, rhythmic, and ideal for dancing. Now, one of the signifiers of Irish music are pub sessions. This is where everyone from beginners to seasoned professionals would go to learn and swap, tunes and information. The musicians would all sit in one corner of the pub and just completely take that spot over. Other people were allowed in the pub, but they were expected to keep quiet and just listen to what was going on. Depending on where you are, the sessions will have its own rules and etiquette to follow. But usually there's a core group who settle things with the landlord or bar owner. Usually there's a core group of people who have kind of discuss things with the landowner or the owner of the pub, and they would lead the session. That being said, plenty of other musicians might show up, and the fun of playing in a session is not knowing what assortment of instrument and skill levels you'll have that day. So now let's head over to the part of the video where you actually see me learn how to
Fiddle
fiddle.
tune day one. This is a fiddle tune. It's an Irish tune. It's called Britches Full of Stitches. It's an Irish polka. So I play it kind of in the sleeve lucra style of Ireland, which is kind of south by Cork. Basically, it means that I like momentum and a little bit messy.
Oh,
and I don't
Messy
like
works.
clarity or like really tight rhythms like they do up in you know, more northern regions.
Yeah.
That I'm blanking on the name. Kildare, I think it's up there. Here's the tune. Do you like open strings or do you want to use your fingers more? Because I can give it to you in D or I can give it to you in G.
Let's do it. Can we do it both ways, but let's start open?
Cool. So this is it in D.
So the lesson was essentially structured with Nathan playing a short phrase and me repeating that phrase. As you can see, we're going back and forth a lot. I did get tripped up a few times. The learning process was not necessarily a smooth one, but whenever that happened, Nate would just go back and play that phrase again, and we would repeat it a few more times to make sure I really had it.
There it is! I wasn't looking. Trial and error. Here's the whole A part. Okay, ready?
Once I had learned the entire A phrase, we repeated it in its entirety a number of times, and then went on to discuss phrasing.
Think of them as two tied notes, and you're actually pushing the second.
I can hear the phrasing.
Yeah, if you try to notate it, it's a lot of eighth notes that are slurred, and the second eighth note has like a soft accent. If I go really hard with it, you know. You'd actually just go back and forth the whole time.
Yeah. As I started to get more comfortable playing the melody on my own, Nate started to add a couple embellishments and harmonize.
One more time.
After a little break, we went into the B section, and I learned that in the same way, completely by rote, with Nathan playing and me repeating.
Me too.
We took another short break, and Nathan discussed the context in which some of these tunes would be played.
Very cyclical. Get into a trance.
It's fun, though.
That's the point of it, right? You're just doing this thing over and over and over while somebody's over there like bartering for a cow or something. It was a really amusing treatise. Treatise is way too. It was like rules for a fiddler. Fiddlers must never be so loud that somebody cannot barter the sale of chickens. It's very non-performative, which is super fun.
And finally, it was time to put everything together, and Nathan had us play the whole tune over and over and over again. But like earlier, he added some embellishments and started to riff a little. To wrap up the lesson, Nate talked about some regional differences, some ornaments, some performance traditions such as nonverbal cues, and played it in the original key, which was actually G.
So some things that happened during that. At one point, you may or may not have noticed I stuck my foot out.
Okay.
That wasn't just because I was getting cramped. That's kind of a universal sign for like last time.
Oh, okay.
Like take it to the end sort of thing.
Okay.
The other thing they do, this is more common, I picked this up in Canada like 6 or 7 years ago. They'll say hup.
Yeah.
Right, as the last time. And that hup means like something's about to change. So
Okay.
hup could mean we're going to a different tune.
Mm-hmm.
Hup could mean let's end. Hup could mean like, you know, I don't know, look at me. It's basically it's the conductor being like,
Yeah.
that
But you
sort of
can't just raise your hand and go.
yeah, right, exactly. So we're doing this. We use our feet, we use voice.
Okay.
Some people, you know, especially if you play with people more, they'll just look around and just catch people's eyes and be like, yeah. Like, there's just all sorts of nonverbal communication. The traditional ways to play it in G. It's higher pitched, so it's the way that they treat it is much sprightlier.
Mm-hmm.
More flippy ornaments, less
a little
like
faster.
droning, a little faster, yeah. A higher chance that people are gonna go up the octave and play it up there, you know. Although you play it down there and then it starts to sound like, you know, an old time relic or something like. You know, you don't see this nowadays anymore because we're just a much more international and connected society.
Mm-hmm.
But it used to be that like, you know, one town, you know, they all learn from this one, like there's one fiddle master who's just like in that town, this old guy or whatever who plays, you know, the fiddle. And they all learn britches one way, right? And then you go 20 miles down the road to another town. Exactly. You say, oh, I'm going to play britches. And you start playing, they go,
That's not
it might, like, sometimes it's close. Sometimes they're like,
That's
I don't even know what to, like, that's called this thing. Like, what are you even doing,
completely
right?
different tune.
Like, totally different. And that's one of the fun things that a lot of, like, archivists are doing nowadays is to kind of, like, retain all that and pull that and digitize it so they don't lose it, stuff like that. Some other ornaments and things that you can do as you're learning this. So one of the really important things about Irish music is the idea of ornamentation.
Mm-hmm.
We don't do lots of improv like you would see in like bluegrass or things like that. We're not gonna, you know, you wouldn't like, you know. Something like that. I mean, I do that, but you're not supposed to in Irish music.
It may not
per
be the
se.
tradition.
Yeah, but how they improvise is more of like a micro improv. So we'd go, you know, a little like a pull off there. A little roll. A little, you know, or a little slide or a little double stop.
It's like I just do that on accident.
For so long I've wondered like how many of these ornaments came from people who were really, really good being like, oh, like this is a fun thing, let me try this out. And how many of them came from somebody just screwing up and somebody being like, oh, that's fun. Let's do that more.
And so began my quest to become a fiddler. I practiced in the morning. I practiced in the evening. I practiced in bed. I practiced standing up. I even practiced without my bow, pizzicato, as the academics in the room might call it. All in an effort to have something decent to present to everyone in class today.